seventh in the series today, IIC PCI conversation with media, the series which we started 7 months ago. Every month we hold it. We began with Ashish Da, and there have been a number of speakers. Today we chose the economic situation as the topic. So I'll introduce the speakers and then Suhas will moderate the discussion. We have Professor Partha. He obtained his PhD at the London School of Economics. He was a professor at the Delhi School of Economics from 1996 to 2011, when he took early retirement and leader in economics from 1990 to 1996. He served as the director of the Delhi School of Economics from 2008 to 2011 and was the head of the Department of Economics from 2003 to 2005. He has also held full-time appointments at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, the London School of Economics and the University of Bristol, and visiting appointments among others at the University of Michigan, HKUST, NUS, NTU and City University, Hong Kong. His papers have been published in top international economic journals. He was the editor of the Indian Economic Review from 1997 to 2007. His areas of interest are macroeconomics, international economics and environmental economics. He is a member of the CESI FO Munich Research Network. Professor Singh, welcome to Professor. Then we have Surajit Mazumdar, who has been a professor at the Center for Economic Studies and Planning, JNU, since 2014. He did his MA, MPhil and PhD in economics from JNU, which makes him a true-blooded JNUite. Before joining JNU, he had an economic career of over 21 years as a member of the faculty at Ambedkar University, Delhi, Institute for Studies in Industrial Development, New Delhi and Hindu College, University of Delhi. He has also been invited and served as a visiting scholar at the University of Rawal under the Erasmus Mundus European MA Global Studies Program of the European Union and at Belzit University, Palestine. Surajit Mazumdar has taught a wide range of courses over his career, covering economic theory, political economic and economic development. His research has focused on the Indian corporate sector, Indian industrialization, and on the impact of globalization on the Indian economy, and resulted in 2 monographs, several papers published in reputed journals or as chapters in books brought out by Indian and international publishers, and lectures and presentations at a number of institutions and conferences in India and abroad. Then we have Professor Vikas Rawal, who is a professor of economics at JNU. He joined the faculty of JNU in 2001 and is teaching in JNU now for 22 years. He did his PhD in Development Economics from Indira Gandhi Institute of Development Research, Mumbai. His research has mainly focused on agrarian issues, food security and employment. He has conducted field-based research in many states of India. He has also worked on global issues related to agriculture and food. We warmly welcome all the 3 distinguished panelists today. And then Suhas Borker needs no introduction. He's a media person, broadcaster, documentary filmmaker and activist. He founded CFTV in 1981. He's been a documentary filmmaker since 1980. Covered and interviewed a galaxy of world leaders for CFTV news programs, including former South African President Nelson Mandela, former Namibian President Sam Nujoma. He set up 3 voluntary civil society initiatives in the 1990s, which continue to actively work today. Working Group on Alternative Strategies, 1992, for an Equitable Development Paradigm, Green Circle of Delhi, 1992, for Environment Protection of Delhi, and Jan Prasad in 1994 for Advocacy of Public Service Broadcasting. He was member of the expert group on Prasar Bharati, Government Relationship Expert Committee on Prasar Bharati. He is an active member of our club as well as IIC, where he is an elected member of the Executive Committee, and his term is ending this month. So welcome Suhas to Press Club also, and please introduce the topic and continue with the discussion. Yes. Begin the discussion.
Yeah, thank you and welcome to Partha, Surajit and Vikas. So we have 92 years of academia here, combined 92 years. So it's a big time, and we are going to talk of the Adani Imbroglio and India's political economy. So this, the expose by this Hindenburg research has created quite a disturbing kind of a situation. And I mean, most of us knew that there was something wrong, but then they put it, so succinctly, how the world's third richest man is pulling the largest pawn in corporate history. So the Hindenburg research revealed, after 2 years of investigation, and presented evidence, quotes, that that this group, the Adani group, of 17.8 trillion rupees had engaged in brazen stock manipulation and accounting fraud over the course of decades. Gautam Adani, founder and chairman of the Adani Group, had amassed a net worth of roughly $120 billion, adding over $100 billion in the past 3 years, largely through stock price appreciation in the group's 7 key listed companies, which spiked an average of 819% in that period. I mean, this is quite crazy. Even if you ignore the findings of this group's investigation, that is the Hindenburg group, 7 key listed companies have 85% downside purely on a fundamental basis, owing to sky-high valuation. The key listed Adani companies have also taken on substantial debt, including pledging shares of their inflated stock for loans, putting the entire group on a precarious financial footing. 5 out of 7 listed companies have reported current ratios below 1, indicating near-term liquidity pressure. Publicly listed companies in India are subject to rules that require all promoter holdings to be disclosed. Rules are also require that listed companies have at least 25% of the float held by non-promoters in order to mitigate manipulation and insider trading. Now, 4 of Adani's listed companies are on the brink of delisting threshold due to high promoter ownership. The Hindenburg research indicates that offshore shells and funds tied to the Adani Group comprise many of the largest public, i.e. non-promoter holders of Adani stock, an issue that would subject the Adani companies to delisting. Were Indian securities regulator SEBI rules enforced? Many of the supposed public funds exhibit flagrant irregularities, such as being 1. Mauritius or offshore-based entities, often shells; 2. Beneficial ownership concealed by nominee directors; 3. With little to no diversification, holding portfolios almost exclusively consisting of shares in Adani listed companies. Now, as you are all aware, the Adani Enterprises aborted the FPO, the follow-on public offer of 20,000 crores. Now they did it to protect themselves from the public outcry. But how far this is going to get forward, we'll discuss this. So over to Partha.
Thank you, Suhas. It's a pleasure to be here. Let me at the outset admit that I have no expertise in the matter, but I will try and sort of discuss this as minutely and as threadbare as possible. And so, Hindenburg set the cat among the pigeons. And I find it absolutely amazing that nothing was done about the Adani Group till then. Okay, so just to give you flavor of the numbers we are talking about, it seems that since the Hindenburg report came out, at least $135 billion worth of Adani's assets were wiped out. Now, when India's foreign exchange reserves fell by 100 billion in a course of 1 year, that made the headlines. And here is one enterprise who was leveraged, who had so much leverage that 135 billion was wiped out due to one report. Okay. Now, of course, there are questions that if any Indian citizen had raised these matters, then that person would have faced a lot of music from a lot of, there's a full orchestra that would provide the music. But here, nothing. I mean, the Adanis have not gone to court. They have not actually been subsequently hauled over the charcoals by the authorities. That okay, we didn't know this was going on, and now we know. And will you please come and explain these things? So, what's going on here? And I hate to use this very nice Sufi line, but it is that Darda ke will come back to me in a minute. So it's basically saying that, look, I am scared that if the truth might come out, the Raza Ashkara will come out. So therefore, there is they don't want to speak up because it could come out. So this is a problem. Okay, so now why should we worry about Adani? It's a private enterprise. Why should we worry about Adani? Let them do in their own use. But there are problems. There are problems because the doing in their own use is provided by a lot of that juice is provided by government funding. The LIC, the SBI, they have bankrolled them, and a default, which is probably not going to happen. A default may not happen, but very close to a default would happen. So, as to my understanding, Adani Group is like a Ponzi scheme. Now, we think of a Ponzi scheme as something like the housing market. There is one asset whose price goes up and up and up. Now, the Adani Group, there is cross-hauling of assets. So, you might have seen that in the newspapers in the last 2 or 3 days that suddenly the Norwegian pension fund has woken up to realize that Adani was using funds from the Norwegian pension fund, which has a green mandate to fund its coal mining in Queensland. So therefore, there was a lot of ignoring of facts by everyone, and this is clearly that's going on. So Ponzi scheme is what you should think of. So that's one thing, that how come the tax authorities and people who look at the corporate governance in this country did not mention anything like this. The other thing about the Adanis is that this you hear from a lot of people who are pro-government, and why not? I mean, you say what. So they would say that, look, this is not the first time you are accusing the government of crony capitalism. What about Birla? What about these people? And the answer is that, with the liberalization of the economy, one would have expected a dynamic business group to diversify diversify. Of course, they've diversified, but the diversification is almost exclusively within the ambit of natural monopolies. What is a natural monopoly? A natural monopoly is that, in electricity, for instance, you cannot have 15 firms providing electricity in Delhi. So natural monopoly is a single firm provides it. So look at Adani, ports, airports, electricity, even if you extend the definition a little bit, probably coal is a natural monopoly, and natural monopolies need to be regulated. And the fact that the Adanis have not been regulated is a scandal in itself. So it doesn't. I'm not talking about share prices. That you give a lot of natural monopolies to one single business group, and we've seen that 6 airports being given to them when there is no experience. Defense, which is also in some sense a natural monopoly, can be given to them. Today the Israeli government has, the Israeli ambassador has come out in defense of Adani being given Haifa port. So there is no question of being regulation. You go in there and you make your money, and that's it. So what India needs is industry with some outer orientation, meaning industries which will export. Adani, by and large, is completely selling to the Indian market, which is a sheltered market. So therefore, there is a problem. So the parallel with the old Congress regime of promoting birlas and all is valid up to a point, except the world scenario has changed, and except the way things have unraveled. So the question is why was this not done? So there's obviously a quid pro quo. A quid pro quo which is very clear from the silence of the government. The government has been very quiet. The government has been only peripherally attacking what's going on, in the sense of saying that this is to run down the India growth story. I mean, it's not very clear what is the India growth story to me. And people who look at the data can probably tell me. Then the other thing is clearly election funding in India is so non-transparent with the electoral bonds that there is a quid pro quo. I mean, I don't think that I have no evidence, because no one really has evidence from who's paying into the electoral bonds. But the fact that there is this one individual, and I could repeat some of Suhas's figures, one individual who the group goes through whose assets go through the roof, and somehow that individual's group, and people are now saying that don't dump on Gautam Adani only, it's his brother also who's equally culpable. So what is the way out? There is clearly lessons that you have to learn for policy making, the lessons which were in the public domain. So if you have not learned them, then there is a problem. Okay, but you have to do something that this will not be repeated. Okay. Now the question is, who will bail out Adani? The Adani story in some sense is over, because it's in the public domain. I don't think even their best friends, and they have many best friends, will be in a position to give them loans, to go back to the heady days of the assets rising at a rate that they were rising. So what we will probably see is some default at the margin, but we will see a leaner Adani group, which is probably what what they should have been in the first place, but for the support from the government. So potentially it is a systemic problem because it's really very big. But probably it may not blow up except in a political sense. So, let me stop.
So I now ask Surajit. Thank you, Partha. I ask Surajit.
Thank you, Suhas. Professor has laid down some of the ground on which I would make my observations. I would say that as far as the story that the Indian research brought out about the Adani, significant part of that information is simply facts which are known and can be verified. There are some parts which are allegations of illegal activities whose truth we are not in a position to exactly verify. But of course, and unfortunately those who can don't seem to be interested in doing so. But if those allegations were true, and if there was a scandal of the kind that we have, I would say that this was a scandal in the making. There would be nothing surprising, given the history of what has happened, unfolded in the Indian economy. There would be nothing surprising if the story, both on the Adani side as well as on the Indian side, as a counter-accusation also, that both may be equally, in a sense, true. Now, why do I say that? See, if we go back to the 1991 process of economic reforms, there was an underlying theoretical understanding that state attempts to regulate private capital, which was supposed to be the old policy, resulted in corruption, inefficiencies, and misallocation of resources, and therefore it would be better to liberalize, deregulate, let private capital lead the economy, let the animals, unleash the animal spirits, and you rely primarily on markets and competition as the disciplinary mechanism which ensures that private capital remains, or its actions are consistent with, in a sense, the larger economic growth. This was the general kind of idea behind the economic reforms process. Within that process of market disciplining was also the one component of that was supposed to be, which provided the rationale, in a sense, for eliminating things like the MRTP Act and the whole objective of controlling excessive control over economic assets by relatively few families in India. Giving up that objective, one of the justifications for that was that disciplining mechanism, part of it was to operate through the stock market. The two legs of that mechanism were that first, the assumption that stock markets are basically capable of being efficient in discovering the true value of any enterprise, which is reflected in the prices of their shares. And all you need to do in order to make the stock market perform that function more efficiently is to have certain rules and regulations requiring corporates to disclose certain information. So disclosure requirements are what you need to do in order to allow the market to capture the true value of the enterprise. The second leg was supposed to be the market for corporate control, which is the underlying basis for things like the takeover code, which is that if any corporate management is not managing the enterprise in a way which maximizes shareholder value, it's not working efficiently, then the difference between its actual value and the potential value will make it vulnerable to be taken over by other managements. And shareholders, even if they can't influence in the annual general body meetings what the corporation does, at least have the option of selling shares to others who can buy these undervalued shares and acquire control over the management of companies. So a market for corporate control would keep corporate management also in check, ensure that they act in a way which would maximize shareholder value, and maximizing shareholder value was all equated with functioning in a way which would result in efficient allocation of resources and the best possible route to economic development. Now, if this was the understanding, then it's perhaps rather odd if someone complains. And it was also argued that this process would work even more efficiently if you allowed, if you had open capital accounts, you allowed foreign institutional investors to also enter into the Indian market. You had Indian corporates also accessing international capital markets, because then you would have in these markets players who are much more efficient in accessing and processing information, and therefore this process would work more efficiently if you integrate it in a sense with international capital markets. Now, if you accepted this, then it's rather thick today to complain of a foreign entity doing something which brings down the value of an Indian enterprise by basically uncovering some information which is revealed to the market, because that was essentially supposed to be part of this process. So why should you be complaining if information has been uncovered and that is getting reflected in the so-called prices of these shares? If other players in the market were willing to accept more rosy projections about the group's future and participate in the process by which the prices of the Adani Group's company's shares outperformed the overall market several times over the last few years, if that valuation was correct, the reverse process when some other information is revealed as equal value. That was based on some set of information, this is based on additional information. The point actually is that should be asked is, in a case where in all the Adani companies, 60 to 74%, that's the range of what is called the promoter holding, which is the proportion of the shareholding which is controlled by the group. Despite 60 to 74% being the shareholding of the Adani Group, why is it that market players, the rest of the players in the market, gave so much credibility to the Hindenburg report as to bring down the value of the enterprise by such a large degree? Why did they give that credibility to that information? That's in a sense, despite the large holding that the Adani Group had. Now, in fact, fact of the matter actually is that all valuations of enterprises, all prices of shares have an inherently speculative element, because they are based on, even if you accept standard, it's based on anticipated returns on a given financial asset. It's not based on actual concrete performance, it's based on anticipated returns. So it has an inherently speculative element in it. And there are market players who play on that particular speculation. Only thing particular about Hindenburg is that it seeks to profit from the decline in the prices rather than an increase in prices. Fundamentally, it is no different. You are profiting, seeking to profit from the movement in prices. Hindenburg is a short seller, basically benefits from a decline in prices because it borrows shares or whatever financial asset it is speculating in, and sells it at a given price and expects the price to come down and buy back and return what it has borrowed at a lower price and therefore profit from that. It's no different fundamentally from profiting from an increase. So if you have players participating with you in inflating the price of shares because they also stand to benefit of it, that's fine, but this is not fine. And suddenly the question of a foreign entity comes up as to some nationalism question comes up. But even though that was supposed to be part of the process that all these foreign players will enter the market and add to the efficiency of this market. The second thing important, I think, to emphasize is that in the Indian case, there is no possibility of a market for corporate control to exist. All Indian companies which are traded in Indian stock exchanges, whose securities are traded in the stock exchanges, they file what is called shareholding patterns. It's available on the NSE website, it's available on the BSE website. Just list out the top Indian companies which are most traded on the stock exchange and look at their promoter shareholdings. Adani is not an exception. Very high promoter shareholdings are so common in the Indian stock that no major Indian company is under any threat of a hostile takeover, because their promoters are controlling such a large proportion of the share. So there is no possibility of a market for corporate control. That's not the actual mechanism at work. I said the prices of shares are inherently speculative, and because of that we have seen time and again, it's not just in India, it's not just in Adani's case. At the time of the global crisis, this story came up that players in the markets do not always do due diligence when they become part of the process of raising the prices of the shares of any financial security. They don't necessarily follow due diligence. And the objective of maximizing shareholder value does not always lead to so-called efficient allocation of resources, but accounting fraud, juggling accounts to inflate values. It's been a story that has been repeated across the world. United States also, we've seen so many stories. People have been jailed for that activity. Big corporations like Enron, AIG, which is also a player in the Indian market, all have been found guilty of these things. In India, we remember also this case of Satyam. Same story was repeated. So it's not that these are unexpected things which should suddenly, Hindenburg has brought out something that the regulators in India should not have been aware of, should not have been conscious of, that these things should have been happening. And it's only now the question comes with why they failed to look at any of these activities all this time. Why did they fail to even investigate when one particular company, one particular group, and it's not one company, but several different companies are following a pattern where the prices of their shares are rising very rapidly, outperforming the general market several times over. Should not that have been a cause for investigation as to what exactly is happening? If you remember when Harshad Mehta's scandal happened in the early 90s, it was the same story. Stock market was moving, he was moving the market, government said, let's not bother, this is good news, let's not bother it. So that's the one of the fundamental, I think, lessons that comes out of this particular scandal is that what happens with this approach where you say that private capital will lead the economic growth process. The state restricts itself, that it will not even substitute private capital in any particular sector or area. It lets private capital lead that particular process. That leads to inherently a systemic tendency towards a permissive attitude towards corporate lawlessness. Because you are placing large part of the economy and its resources in the hands of some. And this is, I talked about the fact that promoter shareholdings are very high. But one should not be under any illusion that that means that promoters and their families are providing a large part of the risk capital in their businesses. The promoter shareholding, again, you can look at any promoter shareholding, it is usually not more than a small part of it is made up of individual holdings of family members. That is what they directly own. It is always made up of shareholding held by other entities. whether they are other companies, whether they are other limited liability partnerships, whether they are trusts. It is held by other entities. So essentially, this is a process of engineering by which, without actually putting in a large quantum of money, they are able to control a large amount of shareholding, like essentially different patterns of interlinked holdings by which they engineer this large holding. It's not that their money. So I, for example, don't accept often the so-called wealth holding of the calculation that people do, which is basically determined by this promoter holding. Their own wealth that they risk is much less, but the wealth that they control is much more, because entire corporations and the large amount of resources at their command are under the control of. So essentially, this corporate form and this group structure allows what is already a highly concentrated structure of wealth ownership in the country, where the top 10% accounts for more than 55% of the wealth, to be a further layer of concentration, where the wealth of many comes under the control of a relatively small number of business families, who then are in control of both the financial resources that go into any kind of productive activity, as well as over large sections of your production system. So this kind of control is what has been in many ways facilitated by the process of deregulation. Limited liability partnerships are not something that was possible earlier. This has come from with the liberalization process. Restrictions on these cross holdings, which would allow large promoter holdings, which were part of the earlier anti-monopoly legislations, were removed with liberalization and allowed these big business families to increase their holdings. So go back, look at say Reliance in the early 1980s, it had 25% holding, because 25% was one of the threshold levels important under the MRTP Act. Usually they would keep it below that. But now it's 50%, because it's of the fact that various options that were available have been post-liberalization, the use of offshore entities for this purpose will also become much more easier. Locating offshore entities registered in tax havens. This has also become much more easier after liberalization. So liberalization has in a sense facilitated not so much competition, but a great degree of monopolization and control of this country. And in fact, if you look at the liberalization, if you look at one of the ways the liberalization or deregulation legitimized or rationalized was the opening up of several sectors which Partha was referring to, which are natural monopolies, where competitive markets cannot operate, where regulation is essential to private sector, telecom, mining, electricity, banking, insurance. Several of these sectors which pre-91 were primarily in the public sector domain were opened up to private capital. And if you actually look at the Indian growth process of the last 30 years, these sectors have actually played a much more important role than industrial manufacturing. So what has been facilitated is these large groups concentrating large resources in their hands, expanding in these areas where the state's role via regulation was always important. So there was an objective basis for favoritism, patronage, cronyism to operate. And deregulation provides the rationalization for not taking this into account and building in structures which would prevent this. Because you have to liberalize, not regulate. So liberalization provided the rationalization for all kinds of things being permitted. And that's the reason why I've seen in these sectors scandal after scandal, corruption, the argument from 2G to coal mines, allocation, and scandal after scandal, because systemic basis for that was actually created. And the Adani phenomena and the now, in a sense, is an endogenous product of that process. Both the story of how it reached where it has, the story of its validation, and also Hindenburg report and the bringing down of that valuation, which has led to revision of plans about its future. The return of the money under the FPO, as well as revision of its expansion plans. All of that has followed. These are all indigenous products of that very same process of deregulation, and what we have had finally as a result of that is, of course, these corporates have grown, but we have not had, as Mr. Partha said, industrialization. We have not had significant amount of employment creation. So in a sense, a license was given to all these groups to, in the name of the fact that they would deliver growth, expansion, employment to the rest of the population. That has not happened, but this kind of accumulation has been fostered. And I think particularly at the current juncture, when we are in a time when they are not even investing in expansion, when industrial growth is stagnating, employment, there is a serious crisis, at least at such a time. If one seriously wants to do something about it, then of course one has to properly investigate the truth about this particular case, but one also to rethink some of the conventional wisdoms on the basis of which we have tried to conduct our economic affairs. Thank you.
Thank you, Surajit. I mean, you have explained the whole thing so well. So it's a quite a complicated kind of a thing, but you have explained it so well. Now I ask Vikas to come.
Thank you, Suhas. Well, I think Professor Sen and Surajit have made my task somewhat easier. And I want to essentially focus on one specific aspect of this entire affair. And I think taking on from what Surajit has just said, I think what we see in the Adani affair is clearly much bigger in scale than what we have seen so far, but in some sense, something that, the story of 3 decades of economic reforms in India has been about. These are the kinds of things that have been in the making because of the nature of state policy over the last 3 decades, where, giving concessions to favored corporate entities, giving removing critical aspects of regulation, deregulating, and in fact often bending the rules to favor big corporate entities and opening up the fields to them has been at the core of state economic policy and states sort of functioning. Now, this is clearly what seems to be behind the rise of Adani's. But that said, it's also the case that while it seems to be the case that, well, it is indeed the case that the big rise of the Adani's happened under the present dispensation, and it seems to be the case that much of it has been thanks to the support that the dispensation has extended. It is by no means the case that big corporate houses, including the Adani, had no such support before the present regime came into being. And I would like to bring to your attention the context of Adani's sort of dabbling in the agricultural agribusiness domain, and draw your attention to 2 key areas where they have been major operators. One is the case of apples, where Adani's have been making investments for a while and are indeed the biggest corporate players. Now, Adani's participation, sort of entry into the Apple business predates the current government, but interestingly is a child of the attempts in the post-liberalization period to extend to deregulate agricultural markets, open them up to agribusiness and provide concessions to agribusiness to exempt them from the regulation that was put in place as part of the APMC Acts in different states. So during the second UPA regime, there was a major push to start deregulating agricultural marketing, and it took the form of getting the states to start exempting the fruits and vegetables and some of these commodities from the purview of the APMC Act. Now you can clearly see that this is what was then extended under the current dispensation into the 2020 farm laws, which sought to extend those exemptions not just to all commodities, but also to create a national framework for doing it. But this story of providing exemptions to agribusinesses to dabble in agricultural marketing and not be sort of restrained by the APMC Acts is a story that started before the Modi government, and Adani's was clearly a beneficiary of that, and Adani's capture of a fairly significant share of the Apple market is clearly born out of that. That said, Adani's so that's one side of it. The other is the fact that Adani seem to have benefited significantly from government's direct investments or extension of cheap credit facilities and investments of various kinds. Now, in the case of Apple, the big case is of a company called FHEL, which was a subsidiary of Container Corporation of India, Concord, sets up a company called Fresh and Healthy something, which was a big player in the Apple game. They have created a storage facility of about 10,000 metric tons, and they used to buy apples. So this was a public sector undertaking. Used to buy apples in Himachal, about 10,000 metric tons, and they had created storage facilities. I think in 2017, they decided that they were not going to do any more business, but would instead rent out these publicly created storage facilities to corporate players who are in the business of fruits, and you know who the big ones are. So there is that direct benefit you are making from facilities that have been created through public investments. The other side of this is what was Adani's model in the Apple business, and that in fact Adani is dabbling in the Apple business on the one hand reflects how the state policy has been manipulated to favor some big corporate houses, but at the same time also reflects the limits of crony capitalism. And the limits of crony capitalism are things that sometimes are of the nature that sometimes I think even crony capitalists don't realize. Now, take the case of Adani Apples. Now, what is the business model here? The business model here is that Adanis are going to buy apples cheap. Immediately after the harvest, the apple prices are low. And even if you go by the narrative, their narrative, you can improve upon the efficiency, you can provide better storage facilities, you can do some value additions, and that can bring some additional benefit. A part of it may be given to the farmers. Whether or not it actually reaches the farmer is a question. But let's not go there. The model is that you buy apples cheap after harvest, keep them in controlled atmospheric storage, and then sell them at a significantly higher price in the lean season when apple supplies are short. Now this model obviously never took into account the fact that how many people in this country are actually have the capacity to buy apples in the summer season at double the prices. So there is, in fact, a paucity of demand. There's simply not enough demand for apples to be, for high-priced apples that people would buy in the off-season. Now that has clearly become the barrier. So despite all the support that the Adanis were provided to sort of expand into and capture the apple market, Adani's purchase of apples has more or less stagnated at about 20,000 metric tons for almost a decade. Now that is an interesting, problem that on one hand you are providing benefits and in fact even bending rules and laws to facilitate entry of agribusiness and growing capitalists of this kind. But on the other hand, the larger economic context is one in which the economic condition there, the economy is in the doldrums and people don't have purchasing power and there's a crisis of theirs to actually be influenced. The other example that I would like to give is a story that's still playing out, one has to see where it goes, but is clearly a case where the state has extended massive benefits to allow a company like Adani to capture a very crucial area, which is the food grain management. So PCI has been giving contracts to Adanis to establish silos. And Adanis have established silos of about 800,000 tons to about 1 million tons by now perhaps, is what they were eyeing to, and they perhaps are close to that. So about 1 million ton of food grain storage capacity is has been created by Adani Agro Logistics, which has now been merged with the Adani ports. Now, what is the model here? For all we know, bulk of the investment that has taken place has been financed through public sector banks and so on, extending cheap credit and investments. But also you have a situation where essentially Food Corporation of India is saying that in the years in which we procure, because the market prices are low, farmers sell to FCI. FCI would store its grain in the Adani silos and give you rent. In years when we don't have large procurement and surplus stocks to hold, you would be buying because the market conditions are such that the private players are buying, and Adanis can actually use the capacity to buy the food grain and store it. So essentially what you're doing is that you're creating a business model in which you are providing the backup. That we finance investments, you create capacity, you run business in the years when you don't want to procure because the prices are too low and farmers are not selling it, we will use your capacity and we'll pay you rent, so we'll cover you. So, the kind of guarantee and assurance that farmers have been seeking for, and farmers fought for a year asking for a statutory guarantee for returns, and you've not given that, is a guarantee that you provide to Adanis for making investments which also you finance. So you essentially have a situation where state, instead of creating capacity directly through using the resources that it has, basically finances it through a big private corporate and provides them an assured market for using the facilities that have been created. So that seems to be the kind of model that has been used, and Adani's, there's two major sort of entry points of Adani's in the business of agriculture are clearly of that nature.
Thank you, because this is an area not well known, apples and silos. It's not well. Thank you. So Partha wants to come in at this point.
Yeah. Just two short points in the light of what Surajit has said. One is something that always comes back, that for instance, isn't Adani's presence in ports and airports creating value? And this is not the first time we hear of this, because you will recall that when the 2G scandal was erupting, every day, Anand Sharma and Kapil Sibal were on television. And it's hubris of power. So many years of power, they spoke very aggressively, and that's exactly the point. That what is the price at which they acquired is not important. Is it creating value? Are there forward linkages and backward linkages or not? That is not my concern. My concern is that is it of value to Adani, or is it of value to the 2G license holders? And how has the state given them this right to, without getting anything in return? That's my first point. Because this is something. What about we always comes back to this? The second thing is, again, what Surajit said, and this is something that I have personally had experience with. For instance, government securities initially were not sold to foreign business, foreign financial entities. And if you sell a little bit of government securities, there would be a lot of demand for it. Because they are just going to diversify their risk and buy a little bit of your, even if you are a bad guy. But once you integrate with the rest of the world, then you are in for trouble, because then if you've ceded power to them, and they can call the shots, and in most cases they will call the shots. My tryst with Persian poetry, so it was that Darda ke raz pinhan khwahad shuda shikara. So I am scared that Darda is a darna, and raz pinhan is hidden raz, and it will become known to everyone. So that's clearly relevant for the crooks as well as for the Sufi.
It's a very unusual for an economist to give Sufi poetry. Anyway, thanks a lot, Partha. Before we open up, I had one question which I just want to be enlightened on. That the withdrawal of the FPO of 2,000 crores by the Adani Group, 20,000 crores by the Adani Group, doesn't it in itself prove that they were afraid that if they don't withdraw, they'll be in for a wider suit. So therefore, it's like when your house is being burned, and you have another house on the side, you break the wall so that the fire doesn't go to the next house. I mean, it's like saving what you can and not letting everything go. So I want your comment on that.
To me it seems to be the case that once this the Hindenburg report came, and you had, of course, the share values collapsing, in the normal circumstances, the FPO shouldn't have succeeded. What was probably done as a matter of saving face was friendly investors were made to take up the offer with the assurance that this is only temporary parking of funds. And once that is over, you return the money. Well, otherwise, it doesn't make sense. If your FPOs actually succeeded, there is sufficient subscription, then that would mean that those who are investing in you are not buying the Hindenburg report, are not bothered by the fact that your share prices have collapsed. They are thinking that this is temporary. And if you think that that is the correct view, why should you return the money that you have mobilized? So it's probably likely that it was a face-saving exercise to get some friendly investors to park their funds temporarily. And because it had to be temporary, it had to be returned. So therefore, they don't go ahead with it finally. That's what seems to me to be the most plausible explanation.
So can we now open up for questions? Yes, please. Yeah. Can you take the thing? You mentioned identify yourself from the panel.
I am Pradeep Gupta. You mentioned about the systemic failure, and then more than the systemic failure, is it not the complexity of the officers manning the is it not the complexity of the officers manning the system? Let me speak like this. I think the officers manning the regulatory systems, because it is very unbelievable that the SEBI will not or the RBI will not know that such a large amount of thing, and you have rightly pointed out it's a Ponzi type of scheme. Not only this, but then lot of valuations is happening in the virtual enterprises, like you see Paytm, etc., etc. So it's all akin to all those things. You have to not only this, but other areas too. You have to look at this thing. So if our regulators, the officers, because what tools you will give them, they have the tools. There are a lot of grey areas where they have to apply the mind. And if they don't do it, everything cannot be written in black and white in books and you tell that this was not written in our rules. So this is what one point I would like to mention. Second, what Surajit told that about the that regulation has to be done in the giving the airports, etc. I remember what I was part of that proceedings when the Mumbai-Delhi airport were being restructured. It was very clearly laid down in the rules that only one airport will be given to one entity. How it has happened that 6 airports have been given to one entity, where this change has happened. So the complexity of the government or the party in power is also another issue. So issue is a systemic failure, you can say, but the people managing the system, they are the bigger problem.
I think we just take one more question. Yeah, please.
My name is G.B. Kumar. Partha mentioned creating value. Now, had liberalization not happened and if the government had been fully in control as it was earlier, would this kind of value have been created? Like the average man, layman like me, thinks that the airport runs very efficiently and that Bombay and Delhi was running like nothing before it was given over to private capital. I mean, you're talking about liberalization, deregulation, all that you feel that has not helped employment, it has not helped industrialization, but has it created more efficiency or value in the enterprises that Adani is in?
How you should ask the question.
I mean, I'm S.N. Sahu. The adverse consequences of this scandal, is there on the stock market, on the investors, on the economy as a whole. So, how long do you think it will take to recover from this shock?
हेलो सर, मैं माशाद अली। सर मेरा क्वेश्चन थोड़ा सा इनसे अलग है। अभी LIC और SBI का जो इन्वेस्टमेंट अडानी में है, जितना इन्वेस्ट किया था बस उसके आसपास ये पहुंच गया होगा, तो आपको क्या लगता है कब तक ये अपना इन्वेस्टमेंट वापस निकालेंगे उसमें से? मतलब they will withdraw their money.
I think you take first vote. You take first one.
I think it is a sort of, people do it all the time, and I'm sure that I also do it sometime, but I think this is a very false dichotomy to say that, well, aren't we better off today under liberalization than better, and a lot of things which don't. I mean, there are stories of people saying that these are big bureaucrats who used to go to international conferences with their dry clean suits smelling of petrol. Yeah? And so clearly liberalization has helped them where the dry cleaning quality has improved. So I think it is clearly that liberalization has targeted one section of society which now thinks that we are as good as the rest of the world, if not Vishwagurus. And that's not my point. My point is that the state is in the business of regulation. The state is not in the business of giving freebies. So, freebies was the old regime. Freebies was when they used to allow people to get away without producing value. But today, if you are selling something which is valuable to an individual business entity, you have to see at what price you are selling it. That was my point. Okay, so I'm not comparing liberalization versus no liberalization. So I don't know. I don't know because the situation hasn't unraveled completely. So I'm answering at least two questions. It is clearly that the government and Adani would have preferred things to lie low, and then after a few months, it would have continued as business as usual. But today also, just before coming, I checked. Shares are down by 10%. Of course, now the base is much lower, so the absolute fall is much lower. But so it's falling and falling and falling. Whether there will be default on a large scale by Adani, I'm not sure. I mean, I would be surprised because the government, but the government is in a bind. The government will not be in a position to bail out Adani. That is very clear. So, the old heady days are gone.
You're saying it benefited only certain sections of the population at the expense of rest of the population.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that the increased inequality and things like that. So some people have gained much more. That's all. I'm not saying it's not zero sum. Yeah. And so I don't know. Yeah.
Because the bailout ne kar sakti government, to phir baat kar raha hu.
Yeah, so let me kind of respond to that question about officials who are in charge and their responsibility. I think there are two parts to it. One is, after all, officials who are responsible for enforcing are also chosen. So it's not that they choose themselves to be so there's a process of who gets chosen to perform this function. And the second is, what's the environment in which they are operating? What are the kind of signals that they get about what their mandate or job actually is? Now, in all this, what has happened with all this, with the regulation that comes with deregulation, has been one in which the economic incentives to deviate from the line are immense. See, when we say MTNL and BSNL was operating in telecom, you could have some in equipment supply, some bit of corruption, etc. could happen. There's an inherent limit to the scale. Here, if it's a question of, say, getting spectrum, which is going to give you profits for several, the basis for that corruption is much larger. The stakes are much bigger. So one is, you in any case structurally have a situation where the economic incentives to deviate are high. People are willing to make payoffs, people are willing to accept payoffs. In any case, post-liberalization, that's the other part of the story. Post-liberalization, money making has acquired a kind of acceptability which was not, even businessmen used to hide their money earlier. But now it's like through a process of this enforcement process becoming weaker. What you also get, I think now, is an additional, that there is a political signaling also happening, which is all enforcement processes have to be directed, they are used, and people are going to be get into trouble. Who's going to get into trouble with the enforcement? So, you are getting signals, this is what you do, this is what you don't. And one other part of this phenomena, because this relates to this question of the consequences for the economy itself of this, that if you allow this kind of concentration, one general question is worth asking. It's a country of 135 crore people. Is it actually true that only 100 families in this country are capable of producing this great outputs? That you have to hand over such large part of the economy to others? Is it actually true that this ability is so limited? Or are we actually getting a different thing? That there are different strengths which are at work, which is work in several different activities. And instead of getting building business enterprises which are relatively specialized in some areas, develop capabilities in those fields. So all the big global successful, they are not like these Indian conglomerates stretching across several different areas. So what is the common thing? What's the common strength that you have which works in all these different areas? Certainly not experience and capability in those areas. What's the common thing?
Money.
Then you have the ability
The ability to manage
play that system. That's ultimately what is deciding. So from a social point of view, why should you consider this to be, even if there's, let's assume, no illegality, why should you consider this to be a good outcome? We should be able to have a much wider base, develop specialized capabilities in different fields. Firms, enterprises also should develop this. Instead, you bring up a institution, and this has a kind of self-reproducing effect. You have this too big to fail kind of phenomenon. That they become so big, so important part of the economy, that if they collapse, it has effects beyond the enterprise, and therefore you become even more pervasive in your approach towards them.
Robinin also told about oligopolies that will damage India. Robinin, in that seminar of ET,
Yeah.
Global Business Summit, he has mentioned that the Indian system is marked by oligopolies, and this will damage more. The ex-finance minister mentioned about it that we should not listen to Soros but to Robinin. So restricting monopolies is one part. Nobody will be now that you cannot reverse the change that from socialistic setup we have come to the capitalistic or semi-capitalistic. But giving monopoly to such from one airport to 6 airport, how the rules changed. This is a case study.
Rules are also made.
No, I'm just telling what went into that rules have to be changed. What is the background? This should be studied.
This question about whether there's been an improvement in efficiency, I think one needs to do a fair assessment of this, both historically, looking at the situation before liberalization and after liberalization, because after all, there are many areas where the public sector has, let's say, historically, green revolution was scripted by the public sector. I mean, the scale at which Food Corporation of India is able to manage food grain, no private corporation anywhere in the world has been able to do anything of that kind. So that's one side to it. The other side is that what has been done with by the private sector, by big private corporates like the Adani and others, with the related state support. One also has to make a fair judgment of assessment of that. I mean, building silos is not, technologically anything that there's no rocket science there. And in fact, look at Delhi and Bombay airports. Okay, they have become bigger, they are handling much more plane traffic, but it's been built existed. It's not as if, they've been created from the scratch.
Somebody else built it.
And
Somebody else built it.
somebody else built it. And you would handle them to a company which has zero experience of building and running airports. So, there is no basis to make the argument that the private sector corporation that was given the contract to build these airports had any inherent capacity to actually build world-class airports. What they did was they simply took public sector assets and strengthened them using expertise that they didn't have, that was not theirs. So, it's the same thing with Air India. You handed Air India practically for free.
Yes.
And now, you shaved off all the debt. So,
Yeah. There was one question. Yeah, before you come in, there's some things which are very clear from this discussion. There is complicity, obviously there is. There is protection, yes, there is protection. Rules have been changed, as you mentioned rightly, yes, there have been. SEBI and other regulators have been asked to lie low, yes, they have been asked. So the whole thing is working to some kind of a design, it's all there. But and then you of course have where we also come in. The Goti media is not picking it up, obviously, because everything is at stake, Adani is everywhere. So anyway, yeah, please go ahead.
I'm Rashmi Singh.
Yeah.
My question is much broader. The facts that you have just highlighted about, that rules have been changed, etc., have been in the public domain for some time. It's not as though this Adani's is the first case. We know about this successively in the last 8 or 9 years of this present regime. The key question that people are asking, and a lot of us are asking, is why has this, and I don't think it is just limited to the fact of a voting media, why has this not infiltrated into the psyche of the public at large, who continue to vote for this, what do you think is required really to bring about a shift of perception?
Difficult question.
It's not an easy question to answer. It is elsewhere also one has seen that some policy tweaks happen which can prove to be disastrous, but for years nothing happens. Okay, so the fact that the government had tweaked the policy in the favor of limited number of business houses was something which was waiting to blow up, but it did not blow up in a big way till now. Now, the second part of your question is not so easy, that does the common man see through this? I'm not common man, woman, see through this. I'm not so sure that, there is it depends on political mobilization, it depends on various other things. So, whether 2024 will see a change in the regime because this regime has been got with its pants down, I'm not so sure.
Well, I think all we can do is part of a process where people at large become better informed. These are not easy things to understand. What's actually going on is not always easy to understand. And our job as people in the media, people like media, is to try and make the public more knowledgeable about what is actually happening. I think that would be part of the objective of an exercise like this, through the media things to the extent possible. But of course, it's not so simple. Something which people directly experience is not so simple or abstract as valuation of Adani Group enterprises, which is demonetization. Disastrous decision like that consequences people directly experienced, even that did not necessarily, because perceptions of what it means have made. So even in this particular case, there is a spin that has been sought to be given, which is part of this whole public relations exercise. This is about foreigners and foreign investors being jealous of the Indian growth story and bringing out, this is also a conspiracy against the nation. That spin has also been given to this particular episode. So all we can do is to try and bring out the truth as far as possible. And the rest of the political process, how to finally get it.
No, I think that, unless the whole story now, the dominant narrative of the present regime is just waiting for time, so that this will also wish away. They want to wish it away. But the point which can happen, there's a big question mark. If this becomes another onion story, if it becomes an onion story, then it hits the public, and the public then, you can't wish it away. So we have to wait for that it to become, and all of us, I think, need to, as academics and media people, to contribute to that onion story. Because this is the onion in the making. But that onion has to, because that will push the things. And the thing is that how long can you keep wishing things away? One wish away, two wish away, three wish away. The BBC story, there's so many, I don't want to point them out, but you can't do that. I think. Anyway, thanks a lot for being such a good audience, and thank you for the time. Yeah. By the way, the next one we have at the IIC, and it will be Shyam Saran, who's going to speak on
China.
The elephant and the dragon and the. So this will be around the 20th of March at the IIC. Topic? That's what I'm saying. It will be
Elephant and
dragon and the elephant in the room.
So Suhas, I honestly wish that your onion story, best wishes for your onion story, but Professor Vikas said, how many have the capability to buy apples? So
that's why I said onion.
Yes, so we wish that these apples turn into onions. So on behalf of the Managing Committee of the President of India, I sincerely thank and I'm very grateful to the three distinguished professors, Professor Vikas and Professor Surajit, Professor Partha for taking a class where, it was very insightful the way, in simple terms, all three of you explained what are we in for and what can be, after Harshad Mehta scam and now Adani, what are we in for, what are we looking at? And I will request our Managing Committee member, Amrita Madhukalia, to hand over our token of appreciation, which has a common man inscribed on it. It's a coffee mug to all the three professors. And thanks to each one of you who could make it this evening. Please have a cup of tea and refreshments just outside this. Thank you. Thank you, Suhas.